Single-minded Fury brings back dual-wielding one-handers. Also, you can equip a shield mid-combat and use Ignore Pain, Shield Block, and... No, you're not a prop warrior. Might as well be, am I right? No, I'm right. Fury is back to wielding all sorts of weapons, and with the unpruning of things like Shattering Throw and Spell Reflect, I have never been more excited to play a warrior. What about you? In the comments! Excitement aside, you should check our stream, twitch.tv/MarcelianOnline. Why? Well, because we play more specs on alpha, run keys and raids with viewers on live whenever we can, and most of all, we laugh at Flame? Yo, I thought we won't be doing this, Crib, man.
Get the fuck out of here.
I'm good at the game, really.
Get the fuck out.
Let's start with what is actually coming back to Fury. Hamstring makes its way into the kit. Previously, Piercing Howl was the only form of slow Fury had, on a 30-second cooldown outside Dragon's Roar, for which they had the talent. Since the new Dragon's Roar, which we will get to eventually, doesn't slow anymore, Hamstring has a place in the kit. In PvE content, it might not have amazing uses. It still costs Rage, which is a big yikes for Fury, but PvP on the other hand, people have been smashing faces with Fury, which was always underperforming arms. So who knows, maybe Shadowlands will bring it forward. Intervene came from the protection tree this time, alongside many more of course. The current iteration sees you charge only to allies and protecting them from melee and range attacks for 6 seconds as long as they remain within 10 yards. This can potentially have very interesting uses in dungeons. It can of course protect your allies, but maybe also take attacks away that would cause necrotic stacks to apply, or similar stacking debuffs. This can be a way to help your tank and adds more utility to the spec, which always suffer from the lack of it. Ignore Pain is also a thing, although its usefulness will be debated heavily. For Fury, this costs 80 Rage, which is in line with Rampage, that also got its cost reduced to 80 from 85, essentially forcing you to choose between the two. Losing a whole Rampage has to be seriously weighted against other defensive options you could use instead. Undoubtedly, if it saves your butt, then it's better, but the effect seems underwhelming. It's on a 12-second cooldown, not reduced by haste, and absorbs an amount equal to 15% of your HP, with a normal Ignore Pain effect in place in that the damage absorbed is part of a larger hit, which only 50% of which will be directed to the shield and the other 50% to your face, meaning it will expire when you take damage amounting to approximately 30% of your HP. These numbers are just for the purpose of the argument. They are pretty low right now, but it depends on how Ignore Pain scales. Likely it will still be underwhelming unless you really just don't care about your damage and surviving is your main goal, at which point things like Impending Victory will be net superior to this, at least mathematically. And speaking of surviving, Shield Slam and Shield Block are in the baseline kit. Shield Slam will not generate rage and Shield Block will not increase its damage or critically block. Aside from this, the effects are the same. They do provide decent amount of tankiness and can make you hold the fort while your tank is being resurrected, kites away, or simply buys you enough time to kill whatever it is that's trying to kill you in return. This is really interesting since the likelihood of this happening is higher when the target is low on HP, and for Fury, Execute generates rage, which is a big source of rage. You cannot use Rampage and Raging Blow, but you can use Bloodthirst while equipping a shield. An interesting dynamic for sure, requires further testing once Mythic Plus and raids are out. Spell Reflect is part of the baseline kit as well, and overall a very welcome addition from the PvP world. BFA had a lot of mobs casting spells at everybody, and if the devs will continue on this design, the Spell Reflect will be very useful. And with Challenging Shout, we close the protection / tanky abilities. Being able to taunt in AoE will most likely only be good to do with the shield equipped, and even then it will be debatable since the amount of block you will have will not come close to what you would have in prot spec. That plus the fact that you don't have things like Die by the Sword might make it difficult to get max value out of this, but still it's nice to have options for those oh shit situations when your tank dies or is close to dying and just needs a few seconds to be healed before he or she resumes tanking shit again. Slam is baseline as well, and seemingly useless. It costs rage and deals incredibly mediocre damage for the cost it has. 50% of a raging blow to be precise, for 20 rage in exchange. It's highly likely that its only use will be with a shield equipped, or maybe some legendary and anima power effects that will grant it some extra utility or damage. One of the most anticipated abilities to make it back is Shattering Throw. Now, on a 3-minute cooldown, it breaks magical immunities and deals a large chunk of damage to absorb shields. We already know there's a dungeon boss where this is more than useful, and it's likely there will be more situations where this baby will come in handy. It will be clearly good in PvP. Sorry paladins, and not sorry mages. A bunch of abilities have been tuned up or down. Battle Shout will now provide only 5% attack power in line with other classes' party and raid buffs. I mean, the only argument the devs had with this change is that that also made sense, although it's still weird, was that if monks gave 5% physical damage increase, Battle Shout will now also give 5% attack power instead of 10%, so that it's not confusing for people, because 10 is bigger than 5 and equality demands that everyone has a 5% buff. Rallying Cry also received a rank 2, where it adds 5% extra HP, making the spell overall stronger than in BFA. With a PvP talent Master and Commander, this will reach upwards to 35% bonus HP, which is crazy for non-raids and dungeon scenarios. Last stand for everybody. And that's it, right? We're done? Oh yeah. Right. Single-minded Fury. I know you nerds been asking for this one for a long time, and personally I like options and variety. Being able to wield one-handers with an 8% increase in damage and 5% increase in move speed is great. Gives Fury the old school feel before Titan's Grip, but that's probably where the good stuff ends. The reason it was taken out was because of balance. Sure, Legion giving artifact weapons that were static two-handers didn't help either. There are a bunch of fundamental problems that need to be addressed for this to not be an actual pain in the ass. First of all is loot. How will drops be balanced? Since now when you spec to Fury you will have access to both one-handers and two-handers. You won't be able to control which type will drop without making it into a convoluted problem-solving situation. As in, you will have to switch to arms loot spec to get only two-handers and to protection to get only one-handers. And if you want only one-handers but get a tank trinket or shield as a drop instead, then this is all made even harder and shittier with the personal loot system. Again, a solution to a problem Blizzard created to make the game friendlier to new people, which in turn has caused issues for groups and guilds that try to gear its members. The other issues are mostly numbers wise, which can always be balanced through the passive itself. As an FYI, the previous iteration of this passive had your damage increased by 35% and your offhand weapon damage also increased by 35%. Now, I don't know about you, but 8% isn't 35%. Again, the scaling of the spec is different than it was a few expansions ago, and as a result, it isn't a big difference between two-handers and one-handers right now, gameplay-wise. Outside cosmetics and maybe animations, there really isn't much of a change in the rotation either, so The Kyrian Covenant brings the Spear of Bastion. This is one of the coolest abilities you will have, most likely. You fire a spear at a location, impaling the targets, dealing damage, rooting them, and generating rage. This has utility, first of all, something Fury needs, and also is a great way to deal damage and generate rage while afar if you have to kite, if you are out of charges and leaps, or simply just want a button to smash some stuff in AoE. It's simple, life should be simple, guys. Revadreth and the Venthyr will replace your Execute with Condemn. Condemn is a beast of an ability. It first of all deals more damage and then Execute, and can be used on targets above 80% health, which is actually the cooler point here. Since Fury has an AoE cap with Whirlwind up to 4 targets, you can first of all cleave this on 4 targets, and if you are fighting more than 4, you can simply cast it on the targets that have not already been cleaved or are still above 80% health. Last time I was able to test this, it wasn't working with Massacre due to a weird bug interaction, but with the future fixes and some execute focused talent, we might see a build creep around a Covenant ability. Some people might not like it very much, and I am on the fence with making Covenants be too impactful, since that will just force players to certain options they don't like or want. Conqueror's Banner will be the Necrolord's gift to your service. This has a neat interaction on a 2-minute cooldown. Activate it once and you get a 2-minute buff that gives 10% movement speed. When you hit things with Raging Blow, you get stacks of glory. You also get glory from killing enemies. Reactivating the ability triggers its cooldown and places the banner down, buffing you and 4 other allies with 20% max health and 50% attack speed, and lasts longer per stack of glory accumulated, up to 30 seconds. This feels right at home with Fury, and Warrior especially, and the buffs itself are really nice. It seems this would have uses in raids for sure, and in dungeons when you can pull big and use this for a major 30-second buff. With the AoE cap, however, it's hard to see how much value it can get, but even so, 50% attack speed is nothing to dismiss. Lastly, the Night Fae brings Ancient Aftershock to the table, since we still don't have Shockwave. Aftershock is a 1.5 minute cooldown, big ass slam on the ground that does decent damage and stuns up to 5 enemies for 1.5 seconds. It also applies a dot for 12 seconds that ticks every 2 seconds and generates rage. This is an interesting AoE choice. The damage is not too bad, hits harder than an execute and in AoE. The rage is also really important, since Fury kind of wants to always generate rage and use it on Rampage. It has multiple effects, so it's hard to judge for its efficiency. For one thing, the stun will most likely be good in dungeons only. The AoE bit as well, unless we can time it with raid spawned adds that need to be bursted down. The rage gain is also per target hit, essentially generating up to 30 rage every 2 seconds for 12 seconds. This essentially creates a 12-second window of fast rampages that could come once every other GCD. Everything about this ability screams AoE, which brings us to the main concern of Covenant. You have things like Condemn that can give Fury serious single target damage output, while Ancient Aftershock is incredibly underwhelming in single target. The numbers will be up for grabs, since the tuning will happen eventually once we have access to tougher content. So take all of this with a grain of salt. The talents have undergone a series of changes so far in the alpha, and I wouldn't be surprised if there were more coming. For now, Fresh Meat has been changed slightly to not have the bonus heal and instead always enrage you the first time you hit a target with it. It will retain its 15% extra enrage chance offered to Bloodthirst, and with the new mechanic it feels like a pretty good option. In AoE it even works well with Meat Cleave, where you can cleave it but the effect only counts towards your main target, meaning you can target swap with Meat Cleaver still on and hit Bloodthirst again and gain the fresh meat effect again on the new target. This can have interesting implications in AoE and dungeons, considering that its row has sudden death to replace the old Endless Rage talent. This way you have an AoE option and a single target option. Good? Bad? On the second row, Impending Victory will now heal you for 30% of your HP. I mentioned this prior in the Ignore Pain discussion. The buff to its healing is nothing to scoff at. 30% of your HP is a big chunk. With that being said, Fury was always a spec that had decent overall sustainability through its kit, which actually has been nerfed in Shadowlands with the Bloodthirst change to heal 3% of your max health down from 5%, also affecting enraged regeneration. It's likely this has been done to tone down the sustain the spec has, which coincidentally works in tandem with a 30% heal from Impending Victory to bring the respective talent into the spotlight. Now the row can focus on mobility, sustain, and crowd control. All three are desired tools you would like to have, and although having to choose between them sucks, you at least have more options this time around. The next row has been changed entirely. Massacre has been moved down, behaving the same as always. Frenzy is a new talent that focuses on single target. When you rampage a target, you get a 3% haste buff for 12 seconds that refreshes and stacks 3 times every rampage. If you switch targets and rampage, your stacks will be reset to 1, so yeah, single target. This is most likely a replacement for Furious Slash and baked into Rampage. And with this, we see a trend of single target versus AoE on talent rows, although this row is single target only so far. Onslaught is another new ability that can only be used when enraged, and generates 15 rage. Its cooldown is lowered by haste, and its damage is almost double that of Raging Blow and Bloodthirst. This is a thing to be discussed. It's essentially an extra button and fits okay with the lower level of gear and stats we currently have on Alpha. The fact that it can only be used during Enrage doesn't really help any potential downtime, since while in Rage you are already pumping hard. With that being said, Enrage has been nerfed when it comes to the haste buff it gives, giving Frenzy even more value. I could see Onslaught becoming a valid option if its damage or rage generation can be buffed, or if you are just fighting AoE, since it can be cleaved, and cannot maintain reliable levels of Frenzy, which with enough gear doesn't look to be particularly difficult. The fourth row remained the same, with the fifth seeing changes on top of changes. Carnage is gone and replaced with Seethe. This one makes Bloodthirst generate 2 more rage or 4 more rage when it critical hits, your primary target at least, so doesn't benefit from Meat Cleave. This is a simple talent that simply screams crit and haste to speed up the rotation. Likely this can become good late game with enough gear, specifically the aforementioned crit and haste. Frothing Berserker has changed once again on cue with the new expansion. It now makes Rampage have a 20% chance to generate 40 rage. It's RNG for sure, but the overall effect is to speed up the rotation and kind of serves the same purpose as Seethe, only that it's not reliant on gear. The last contender is Cruelty, which looks like a redesigned Enrage. When enraged, Raging Blow deals 20% more damage and has a 30% chance to reset its cooldown. This is a bit more interesting since it pushes Raging Blow higher on the priority list. How high though depends on the damage scaling and how all of this sims. Where Seethe might make Raging Blow a legit filler, Cruelty can prioritize it as the major DPS source, although with the current gear template it doesn't seem to be particularly amazing. Maybe if it could also increase the rage generated, as with the other two options on the row, might see some play. Supposedly, the rage increase is baked into its cooldown reset mechanic, which implies a GCD cost to it, while the other two do not. Right now there are slight moments of downtime in the rotation which could see this work, but unless the effect can occur outside Enrage at its current numbers, I cannot see myself using it unless the mathematical value is simply higher, which doesn't seem so at the moment. Moving on to the fifth row, Meat Cleaver has been changed again. Now it increases the damage of Whirlwind by 30% and makes the AoE cleave effect applied to the next 4 attacks. This has a few interactions with the spec at first glance. Its damage increase makes it more reasonable to cast in single target, but the fact that it affects your next 4 attacks means you'll cast it less. Also, as it stands, it's a simple filler in single target right now, so it could have reason to be used there. The problem is that it competes with Bladestorm, which now generates 5 more rage from its BFA counterpart, and Dragon Roar, which doesn't slow anymore but crits for 3 times its normal damage. The 30% Whirlwind damage is a wet noodle buff to a wet noodle ability. Whirlwind hits like a lazy grandma on a hot Sunday afternoon, so cannot really see that 30% damage increase as the deciding factor in picking it. Lastly, Reckless Abandon has been redesigned. Now it makes Recklessness generate 20 more rage up to a total of 60 and greatly empowers Raging Blow and Bloodthirst to Crushing Blow and Bloodbath, dealing way more damage, adding a small charge effect to Crushing Blow as well. Outside of these effects, not much else. Bloodbath had a previous iteration in the game where it was a 2-minute cooldown applying bleeds. The current one has the same name, same icon, but it's just a reskinned Bloodthirst. Personally, I would hope they buffed it a bit, maybe add a nerfed version of the old Bloodbath, or maybe have it heal for more, but then again, it's still alpha and we haven't had the time to test it in proper content yet. Every expansion, the devs seem to have a hard time designing Fury Warrior. Depending on where you are peering from, the spec can be totally different or the same, which is a good way to not corner myself into any absolute statements or impressions. Personally, I feel like the core is there. You generate rage for big rampages. The talents add interesting flavors to your rotation, which I feel is great. Fury doesn't need to have anything complicated added, but cannot suffer from some nuances to each ability that hopefully changes the priority, at least bringing other abilities to the forefront. One thing I was hoping to see is Azurite traits baked into talents. Maybe have Seethe be the Cold Steel Hot Blood. That way the nerf to the heal it does can be counteracted with the Leech. Another thing would be to make abilities more impactful if they are supposed to be added in the rotation. Onslaught feels like it's almost there but not quite, and Whirlwind seems like a GCD to activate a buff and generate a bit of rage. The damage it deals is laughable and it hardly matches its decently meaty animation. Overall, I am excited for Fury and had a lot of fun playing the spec and fiddling with the talent. There are clearly builds and synergies you can reach by going for specific options, and I am always a strong advocate of no cookie cutter builds. This will of course come down to how the devs will balance the specs, because honestly, I could give up legendaries and covenants in favor of monthly balance patches that can make us use the full range and extent of the talents we actually have, as opposed to the same old 7 or 8 of them. Fury will very likely get updates, at the very least in terms of the numbers it has, and you can and should keep up to date with all of this in the Skyhold Discord community, where the top theory crafters analyze the spec even more and give some juicy insight on what's under the Fury hood. And of course, a special thank you to our patrons for supporting the content time and time again. Really appreciate you guys. I cannot say this more. It's not required, but highly appreciated, and it actually really helps us out. We made all of this possible, and look at this little thingy right here. And more of this where this came from. And if you're interested in supporting us a little bit more, the link to our Patreon is down below. You can even find our merch website, which has Marcelian design, hand-drawn, graphical, graffiti type things for t-shirts, hoodies, and a lot of other things. Thank you very much for watching the video. See you in the next one.